Hi everybody, thank you for attending my talk today about sports games, fun, realism, or as I call it, play it like Lebron, but from your couch. Uh, I'm Quentin, I'm a video game developer at Zero One Games. We are a small French and Canadian studio specialized in mobile games, and we do publish a lot of sports games, and that's why I'm here talking about sports games in general with you today. And I really want to start with a kind of a personal story, and it all starts with a very old game that is FIFA World Cup 2002. So, like today, that's a 20-year-old game. But basically, that was a special version of FIFA released that year for the World Cup. And basically, if you've never played it, you're just playing a national team and you can just run the competition, the World Cup, and that's about it. And so with my younger brother, we would spend a lot of time playing that game all the time. That was actually our first PlayStation game. So we would play it all the time. And of course, because I'm French, if you cannot, get it from my accent, but I would pick Team France all the time. And so what I would do is pick Team France and win the World Cup pretty much every run I would do. I would barely lose any game. And it's not because I was a great FIFA player, I wasn't. It's just that France in that game was an incredibly good team. It was full of superstar players. And at that time, to be fair, that kind of reflect the hype that was behind the team, especially in France, or at least in France. But if you know about what France did that year, they did terrible. They did really, really terrible. That was probably the worst humiliation for France since the Battle of Waterloo. And so even though at that time the game was supposed to be super realistic and like that was probably the goal, and at least to us it looked realistic, probably it wasn't that realistic, at least for this reason, not just because Team France was incredibly good in the game despite being humiliated in the actual competition. But even if I was very young, we could clearly see that there was kind of a mismatch between reality and what was going on in the game, And that's kind of where I started that journey of, in sports games, seeing that, hey, there are things that are incredibly realistic, but some of us that are actually not, maybe, and maybe that's a good thing. But sometimes you might wonder, hey, is it better if it's realistic or if it's just just plain fun? And so, I think we can all agree that sports games in general are incredibly realistic. They are made to be realistic. In a sense, they are the ultimate expression of play. Simply because playing is, you can define it as taking your experience from the world and making them yours. Creating your own stories, if I may say, from what you experience in the world. And in that sense, sports games are really the ultimate expression of play because you are kind of replaying what is going on in reality. That's almost uniquely, almost unique to that genre, being that close to reality. And it's also incredibly easy for pretty much anybody to get into that fantasy world. Okay, what I mean by that is, if I give a Dungeons and Dragons game to my dad, not only he has to learn about the gameplay, the rules, and how to play, but also learn about the universe. Okay, maybe you know about dragons, but how does magic work? What are these magic creatures? Yeah, a lot is going on actually in a game like that. You can give a gamepad to pretty much anybody to play FIFA, and okay, it's a sports game, it's soccer or football depending on where you are, and probably the rules of the game, maybe even a few players. So it's very approachable, very family friendly, and that's one of the reasons why sports games are so popular. And on top of that, today sports games are incredibly realistic. In some games it has reached a level that is completely insane, honestly. So in a game like Out of the Park, which is the game on the screenshot on the right, it's a management game where you can actually manage payroll and contract in a general manager mode, basically. So it's really for nerds that you have to manage contract and finance of an organization. But if you play a game like NBA 2K, you can actually buy shoes or then customize them, buy virtual version of real shoes, which is in kind of insane degree of realism when you think of it. You can even drink energy drinks. Like you can think it's a good thing or not, but that's something that exists today. And it's actually in some situations so realistic or realistic enough that some front offices during the COVID, lockdown, some MLB team to train their junior staff, they would use a game like out of the park game to train their staff, basically, because it was that kind of level of realism, and I would argue that really realism is a super selling point these days. If you are, even though there are some question around licensing with FIFA and EA right now, for a lot of big sports games at least, players expect to have the logos, the name, the real team, the real players. And that's a big selling point for them, but that there is also a big expectation from players, right, regarding that. And so realism is, just more than just a characteristic of the genre, but really a major selling point for a lot of sports games. But okay, we talk about a lot about FIFA, for example, but are these sports games really that realistic when you think of it? Let me give you two very simple examples. If you have ever played FIFA, you know that you are generally not playing a 90-minute game. And when you think of it, that makes sense. I mean, nobody would want to play a 90-minute game of FIFA, or few people would, actually. But when you think of it, it's definitely not realistic. Because soccer game in reality are really made and kind of designed, to be played over 90 minutes. And if you play it around, 4, 6, 8 minutes, it's not really soccer anymore. It's more like, fun, tiny version of it, which, can be fine, but that's definitely not what's going on in reality. So in a sense, that's not realistic. And if you actually play a 90-minute game in FIFA, you're probably going to have a score that is very different from what you would see in reality. I'm not sure you can end up with a 0-0 game in FIFA if you play 90 minutes, even though in reality it happens all the time. That's simply because, because FIFA games are made to be played in a few minutes, a shorter time than in reality. The offense as well needs to be more dynamic, so you actually have goals. And that's not unique to FIFA. You play NBA 2K, the scoring needs to be adapted a bit compared to the playing time that you have, because you're not playing the full 48 minutes of an NBA game. So you can see these examples are really simple, but there are many of them. And not to say you don't have a good reason, it's just that it's actually very good point where, the game design team said, hey, here we are, consciously breaking that rule that happens in reality because we think it's going to bring more fun. And to go down that route, I wanted to show a few reviews that I've found. So that one is from a FIFA 97, that screenshot from the Super Nintendo version. And GameSpot said, FIFA Soccer 97 delivers a kind of fluid, realistic action that's become a hallmark of EA Sports titles. And I actually played that game. That was my first FIFA game. And even though probably at that time we found it very realistic, by today's standard, there are many things that are definitely not, Was it fun? Yeah, definitely. But realistic? Probably not. And that one is from ISS Pro Evolution Soccer, which was an insane game, a really good one. And IGN said the character animation are fluid and realistic. Except probably if you check out the game on YouTube these days, really it wasn't that realistic. And you can even check out, on the screenshot, you have that giant French flag going on in the crowd, and probably, that one is really not realistic. Okay, so you can tell me right now, you have been talking about super recent games, super old games? What about more, recent game? And that review from FIFA 22, so it's fairly recent, got me really confused. And that player on Steam said the gameplay caters to esports player with no attempt at the realism that career mode enthusiasts such as myself crave. That says a lot. Like, I mean, definitely, FIFA is a game. Okay, so as I mentioned before, probably they have broken a few rules to make it fun, but still that's probably as close to reality as you can expect, or not very far from it. And saying that the team at EA makes no attempt at the realism that player is expecting, might say a lot. And of course, that's just one review, but I got a few others for you. Like, players make unrealistically fast movement. Okay. And passes from impossible situation arrive perfectly. And overall, not enough realism for me. Which, again, like, if FIFA 22 is not realistic enough for you, there is probably no game that is realistic. I mean, that's totally fair. That can be your opinion. But just to say that if that's not realistic enough for you, your expectation might be like really, really high, I think. And I took a few extra reviews from one of our game, which is Astonishing Basketball. And I really like this one as well. So some players said you should add relationships to the franchise player mode or family of some sort. So apparently that person expects to manage a family on top of managing basketball skills. That second one said it needs a girlfriend in the game who gives you boost if you keep her. Which sounds a lot like a dating simulation game and not a basketball game. And the third one says, this is ridiculously easy, get real and make your game more realistic. So that third player probably expects some kind of, really on-point difficulty level tailored to maybe his skills or his expectation and nobody else, which makes it fairly difficult to then reach any level of realism. So at some point, honestly, the question that you might ask yourself is, okay, you want to manage family, you have girlfriend, you have energy drinks, maybe you have, cars. Why not? Is this The Sims? Honestly, like that's what I tend to think when I read some of these reviews that come sometimes from our own players. Maybe you want. Maybe it's not a sports game that you want. Maybe you actually want The Sims. You want to play, the life of an athlete and not, sports part. And when you think of it, that makes sense. I recently saw a commercial for NBA 2K where it actually the basketball part, or at least the part where you play basketball, is barely mentioned. A lot of stuff is mentioned, but not really the basketball part. And it's because, maybe for some of these players, it's more about the basketball lifestyle more than just playing basketball. And so that's kind of to me where really the fantasy break, because realism is really not a well-defined word, or at least not everybody has the same definition. Clearly you can see from these reviews or just by talking to different players that different players have different expectations. That this is as simple as that, but it has a lot of consequences for us as game designers. And people don't even agree on reality. If I ask you who is the greatest of all time in the NBA, is it Michael Jordan? Is it LeBron James? Is it, I don't know, Kareem? You're going to have different answers. And so it's very difficult when people don't agree on reality, and especially in sports, in basketball, in baseball, you have a lot of statistics, so you can do some kind of objective analysis of a question like that. But if in these cases people are not going to agree on that, it's going to be very difficult to make them agree on something that is as subjective as fun or realism in video games. And so the kind of question that you can ask yourself here, if you are in that situation as a game designer, is where is the limit? Okay, how do you manage that balance between what is fun and what is realistic? And I mean, we're talking about sports here, but that could apply to other genre as well, in a certain sense. And so the question is kind of, when do you stop? Okay, Imagine that you are designing a sports game where you can play as an athlete, like a basketball player. Should you be able to buy a car? Okay. If you're not into sports game, that might be a bit silly, but that's actually a request that we got a lot from some players. But then if you can buy a car, should you be able to drive it? Because, well, after all, if you have a car and you cannot drive it, that's kind of silly, you know? And if you can drive it, does it mean that you can drive it, just around the neighborhood or around the city? Or do you need a big open world to drive it? Because that will make sense, and why not stop at cars? Why not being able to fly or even go to space? And again, that may sound a bit silly, but that is real question that you might have, during the design phase of a game, compared to, players' expectation or maybe even request from players. Again, we actually got requests from players asking us to buy a car in a basketball game. And then when we actually added car at some point, they said, hey, okay, can we actually drive it? So yeah, that can happen. And so it's kind of difficult to say, hey, how do we fix it? I think the first step is always to define who is your audience, okay? And that answer, that solution works for a lot of problems in game design. But really, once again, here it helps a lot. We do use a lot the gamer motivation model from Quentin Sallat, simply because it helps us, kind of categorize our players and say, okay, maybe this person is, expecting to drive a car in a sports game because to them that's part of their fantasy, that's part of the immersion. But maybe that's not the kind of players that we want to target. And if that makes sense for you, maybe you don't need to address these players or these audiences, or not too much. On the other hand, if you say, hey, that kind of player, that's exactly who we want to target, who we want to design that game for, in that case, go for it, definitely. That's a good thing. You could also use the personas from interaction design, which is a bit different from marketing personas, but basically defining these kind of archetypes for your players and see, okay, how this feature or this kind of game design is going to impact them, and is it going to be positive? And if you do that, you also want to define expectation. No matter how detailed your representation of your players are when you are doing your game design, it's important to know, okay, what are they expecting in terms of realism? Does it mean realism in terms of statistic? Does it mean realism in terms of life side maybe? Or maybe your player don't even want realistic stuff. That's definitely possible. You have some sports games that are not realistic on purpose, and that's definitely fine. But you need to make sure that it matches your actual audience or intended audience. And when you've done that, you really want to define your limits accordingly. Be clear about why you have designed things in a certain way. For example, in Astonishing Basketball, the draft is during the season, while in the NBA, the draft is after the season. And so at the beginning, we got a lot of email and complaints from people who didn't understand why we did that, and it didn't make sense to them. So what we did is that we simply explained it. We added a section in the help of the game explaining in details why we took that decision, and we actually got replies and messages from people saying, hey, okay, I didn't understand your decision here. Now I understand a bit more. They don't necessarily agree with it all the time, but at least, they really want to know that we have thought of it and it's not, a bug or an error or something like that. If it's by design, in general, they're going to be more understanding. And you really want to imagine what is your player's fantasy, okay? What do they want? What do they want to achieve in that game? Why do they play a basketball game? Okay, is it to become the best basketball player of all time? Do they want to, live the life of a basketball superstar, for example, or is it really just about statistical achievement? That's something that you want to define as well, so you can define your limits. And I also wanted to add a kind of specific part regarding more for probably free-to-play games. Realistic content is really amazing if you want to expand your metagame, basically. Being able to add buy cars, for example, in sports game, can make a lot of sense to expand your meta, basically. But you probably also want to be careful about how you monetize it, and also be mindful of, okay, what does it bring to the game? If you have a lot of players who are really here for your core gameplay, which is about, for example, basketball, if you have a lot of hardcore basketball fans in your game and you constantly add new features, which is not exactly about playing basketball, but more lifestyle, for example, maybe they're not going to be happy about it. Maybe they're going to say, hey, I'm here to play basketball. I don't care about a car or shoes or things like that. So you really want to make sure, once again, that you know your audience, you communicate with them. And when you add this realistic content as a meta feature, be sure to be able to monetize it and be sure to make something that is going to be interesting for all your players, because that's what matters in the end. You don't want to create content that is going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of time if it's not interesting for most of your players. That's something that you need to be careful about. And if I can offer some kind of summary of how I will do it or how we do it for all games, I think the real lesson here is to always gather some kind of feedback and some kind of data as well, which can find fairly obvious, but apparently not always. So I prefer to say it. If you do have if you're doing a free-to-play game or a game as a service, probably you're here for the long run. So probably you're going to add content and new updates all the time. And in that case, if you do have a community, you definitely should gather feedback. Try to know them, try to ask them, hey, okay, we plan to add this kind of content in the game. Is it something that is interesting? Before we added cars in our basketball game, we asked the community, okay, what do you think of that, to see kind of what was the reaction. And we did that even before implementing it. We wanted to check, okay, it's going to be some kind of maybe realistic content, but it's kind of fairly different from basketball. Is this something that is going to be interesting for at least some people? And are we going to be able to monetize it? And you'd be surprised how helpful the community can be sometimes, even with free-to-play games. And from there, once you have some feedback, data, maybe surveys, you really want to analyze, okay, what is the expectation of our players in terms of realism, but also what kind of fantasy, what kind of story are they trying to tell, and how is that new feature, that new realistic feature, that new realistic content helping your players to achieve their goals and your goals as well. Maybe you want to increase retention, and maybe adding new realistic content is going to help you that. So you want to make sure that you can achieve your goal in that way. And you also want, at the end of the day, to define what your game is really about. Once again, we talk about a lot about games that are realistic, because that's kind of the expectation in sports games. But once again, you can definitely go the other way and say, hey, our game is not realistic and we are absolutely fine with that. I think Rocket League is an amazing example of that, because well, you kind of combine two genres, okay, but in a way, I'm sure they could have gone to a way where it would be more realistic, and they didn't. And I think that's what make the game fun. That's kind of silly when you think of it, cars plus football, but that is what the game is about. And once you are, confident about where you want to go, it's easier to then design things and then explain to players, hey, we're not doing that because we think it's, what our game is about. So that was it. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it was interesting, and I hope it will help you in the future to help you design better games and sports games, hopefully. Thank you.